Who would have ever thought that I would actually be doing a SmackDown review? In the spirit, or not really so much in the spirit, but after an amazing Raw last night, I have been so interested to see whether or not SmackDown was able to fire back at Raw after the amazing Raw that we saw Monday night. Did they? No, they didn't. But I'm not at all going to make a comparison of how great Raw is compared to SmackDown. But the only comparisons that I'm going to make is just to prove a point on why we should not be critical of Raw for the first night of them being live. Well, the second night of being live, because they were actually live on the draft, so this is the second night of them being live. But here's why we shouldn't really be overcritical. Number one, look at the venue for Raw. When you actually did watch Raw, everything felt larger than life. The venue was larger than life. The set was larger than life. You had a huge roster. You had an even bigger ring. Everything felt larger than life. A huge change. Not to mention, they had their music changed from Tonight's the Night, that was from Fort Minor. I do believe it's from Fort Minor, to Enemies by Shinedown. They have brand name music to take over everything. Everything felt big, and it feels like they have a larger budget than they ever had. Then you go to SmackDown. The venue is a lot smaller. I'm not, probably maybe in a mix between NXT TakeOver and TNA. And you also have the smaller venue, a smaller ring, a much smaller roster, and a smaller quality production. Not to mention that when it comes to their new theme music, as well as their new intro, it's done by CFO. Now, for those that don't know who CFO is, CFO actually composes all the music for all the superstars on both rosters. From Sasha Banks on down to Rusev, on down to Jack Swagger, on down to every superstar that is on the roster on both sides has their theme music composed and done by CFO. Now, CFO is actually the music for SmackDown, and it's called Take a Chance. I actually try to look it up on Spotify, but they don't really have it out yet. But Enemies is on Spotify for those who actually have Spotify, and it's awesome. It's an amazing song, and Shinedown is one of my favorite bands. So that actually does show you how less of a budget that SmackDown has and how much of a budget that Raw has. So the reason why I'm trying to make that comparison is because we can't be overly critical for the second night of SmackDown as a show. They have less to work with. They have poor quality. I'm not going to lie. The production quality is extraordinarily poor. And they have a much smaller roster with a much smaller venue and a much smaller ring. In my opinion, the ring is a little bit smaller because everything looked huge, and then you just had this old little space. It looked like they had a much smaller venue in Buffalo, but that's just my overall opinion. But here's this: they have bare bones to work with, but you can make a lot out of bare bones. And also, for people who probably gripe of the fact that the commissioner, as well as the GM, or Daniel Bryan, who's the GM, as well as Shane McMahon, who is the commissioner, coming out a lot more, you also got to understand that they don't have a lot of stars on their show. Not a lot of stars that draw seats, that draw people to the seats. Sure, they got Bray Wyatt, John Cena, Dolph Ziggler, and AJ Styles. You know, possibly those four, but they don't really have much of anything else. So, of course, they got to come out every once in a while and, say, and because they're also two big faces as well. You have Shane McMahon, who's a huge face since WrestleMania 32, and you have Daniel Bryan, who was a huge face since WrestleMania 30. So, of course, they're going to be out there a lot so people can be excited to see them and not turn off the TV set. So, unfortunately, they have to come out every once in a while, and it's not because they're trying to take over. It's mostly because they have to keep people to watch, and that's a shame. But I also saw that they took close to the exact same blueprint as Raw. Raw did a Fatal 4-Way. They did a 6-pack challenge. They did 2 fatal 4-ways in the entire show. They did a battle royal, and then they did the 6-pack challenge, and then they had a random women's match after that, while Raw had a championship. It is somewhat a similar blueprint as Raw. I'm not gonna lie, it is, but the battle royal itself is extraordinarily chaotic. They did what they had to do. They did what they could. There was so many botches all over the place. The ring was extraordinarily slippery. You had Zack Ryder nearly falling off the rope and hurting himself. Thank God Kane didn't win. If he won, it would have been worse. But then we end up having Apollo Crews that end up being the winner of the battle royal, because it was supposed to be a 6-pack challenge. They actually chose the 5 and left the 6th one open for the battle royal, and Apollo Crews won that. Now, as for Apollo Crews, I wish I cared more about him because he's a Georgia boy, but I don't, because the guy's still completely vanilla with no personality at all. But I will say that he is getting better in the ring, and he did impress me towards the end at the main event going up against AJ Styles. I was really impressed with him. But he's still pretty bland on the mic. I'm sorry, he is. And as for having Renee Young coming out and interviewing them, Raw did the exact same thing. I'm just hoping that next week they actually choose to have a different blueprint as Raw and not have the similar one. That's the one thing I was hoping. It was just far too similar, and that's the one thing that made me sad, because this show has so much potential in being great. And speaking of potential, we had a much better match out of Becky Lynch and Natalya. I enjoyed this match better than any pay-per-view they've ever done. Like, seriously, when it came to Battleground and Money in the Bank, I did not enjoy that match at all. Like, I didn't enjoy the match. I did not care. But their match was a lot better, as well as Becky Lynch having her comeuppance. And can we say similar blueprint again? We end up having Sasha Banks versus Charlotte for the title, an amazing match that is still talked about to this day, which is all over entertainment news. And then you have Becky Lynch versus Becky Lynch versus Natalya, with Becky Lynch going over. Same thing. But then after that, you have like a whole random moment. Like, you know, you had once the whole interview thing, and then you had an interruption with Alexa Bliss coming out. Then you had an interruption with Carmella coming out. Then you had another interruption with Naomi coming out. And then you had even another interruption of Eva Marie. I know there was somebody else after Carmella. I just can't really remember at the moment. But other than that, it was pointless. As much as I love Eva Marie and the fact that she owns her heel heat, and I do respect that of her, it was pointless. Because the one thing that Daniel Bryan and Shane McMahon did not acknowledge was the women's division. They set up the 6-pack challenge, but they didn't talk about the fact that the women do not have a title or anything to fight for. That's the one thing that bugged me. They never said anything about that. The one thing I could say about Mick Foley and Stephanie is that they acknowledge everything. Seriously, they put all the cards out on the table and did it in a very organized fashion. And as you saw in the intro of Raw, it was a machine. Everything was working like a well-oiled machine. And it showed in their intro that they are a machine. And I respect the fact that they literally stayed with the theme of being a machine. Can I say the exact same thing about SmackDown? No. It was all about electricity. It was all about, free moving, free everything, electricity. But then electricity, if it's not contained, can be chaotic, can be dangerous, and that can really ruin things. This is what this show was. It was pretty much sticking to the theme of chaos, and that is what this show was. But like I said, they're working with bare bones. So I'm not going to try to be overcritical here. I am very hopeful that the show is going to actually do a lot better than it did. But tonight just wasn't that night. The quality of the production was extraordinarily poor. It was TNA version, like TNA quality. And I'm not saying it as an insult. I'm saying because it looked like something that was shot in TNA. And it just shows you what they're working with here, like budget-wise. Good gravy. But I am going to say this. When it comes to their matches and how they set up their championships is going to be a lot better. Raw is all about entertainment, as SmackDown has always been about wrestling. You have two great wrestlers going up against each other after the main event. And of course, you had the usual guys. You had, well, the guys that were already pre-chosen. You had John Cena. You had Dolph Ziggler. Who else was there? My brain is kind of freezing. You had Bray Wyatt. You had AJ Styles. Who else was there? And Baron Corbin. You had, I think I said 5 guys already. Yeah, you had AJ Styles. You had Dolph Ziggler. You had John Cena. You had Bray Wyatt. And you had Baron Corbin. And then you had Apollo Crews that ended up winning after the Battle Royal. So you had all those 6 guys, which are very amazing in the ring. And the final event, the main event, actually was pretty decent. But then it started to slow down and become a little bit chaotic in the end. But of course, you have the underdog. And I kind of predicted they were going to pick the underdog going up against Dean Ambrose. Even though Dean Ambrose kind of was an underdog. So for people that actually want Dolph Ziggler to have his due, and especially the fact that you had that personal moment between where Dolph Ziggler was talking to the crowd from a vignette or something, like a pre-shot memoir or whatever. But you know, the way he was talking, I'm like, he's gonna win tonight, because they want to have an underdog for people to root for. So that's why they chose Dolph Ziggler to actually go up against Dean Ambrose. Dolph Ziggler makes everybody look good when he's in a match with you. So that's the reason why I am not in any way, shape, or form concerned, because I know it is going to be great. Because Dolph Ziggler will make it great, not only for himself, but also for Dean Ambrose. But not talking about SummerSlam, as for the overall show, it was very chaotic. It was very messy. It was not organized at all. There was a lot of things that Daniel Bryan and Shane McMahon did not talk about, especially with the women's division, which bugged the crap out of me. The women coming out all in a row was completely pointless because they don't have anything to fight for, and it got interrupted very quickly and moved forward very quickly. The women's match don't really mean anything. And you also had a 6-pack challenge that was pretty good, but it was very predictable in the very end. I could pick this thing apart if I wanted to. But my overall thoughts is this. It was chaotic. It was all those things that I just said. But it's a second night live. The first time it was all about the draft. Now it's an actual show, an actual entity on its own. This is the new era. Raw actually shot the first shot, and their first shot was a doozy. It was a bullseye straight in the center of the brain. I guess it really did kind of be a little bit morbid. But other than that, Raw fired back. Well, fired first. And honestly, it was a good shot. But SmackDown, they drew a dud. But that's how it's going to be for the second night. I'm hopeful that they're going to get better. And I think that the next night is going to improve. At least I hope so. Right now, I don't really know. But what are y'all's thoughts about this? What are y'all's thoughts about this SmackDown? For me, I am not going to try to be overcritical here because it's the second night being live. But I'm hoping that next week will be a lot better. But like I said, leave your thoughts in the comment section below. I am curious to hear y'all's thoughts about this. Because for me, I like rooting for the underdog. They had an underdog actually going up against Dean Ambrose. And the entire show as a whole, in my opinion, is the underdog. And I'm all for underdogs. So, kudos to them. And I hope they do better. But other than that, guys, that's it for me. Nature Girl 30 signing off. Peace out. Later.